Have you ever stopped to wonder where our ideas about money, markets, and how the world works actually come from? Well, today, we're going way back to the origin story of modern economics itself, the classical school. These weren't just academics. These thinkers literally forged the concepts that built the world we live in. So, let's dive in.
To really get what they were up against, you have to start with the single biggest question of their time, back in the 18th century. How does a country actually get rich? For ages, the answer was basically mercantilism, this idea that wealth is like a fixed pizza. If you want a bigger slice, you got to go conquer someone and take theirs and hoard a bunch of gold. But with a new world of industry and global trade starting to bubble up, that answer just wasn't cutting it anymore.
And that's because the world was smack in the middle of a couple of massive revolutions. First, you had the scientific revolution, thanks to minds like Isaac Newton, which proved the universe wasn't just random. It was governed by natural, predictable laws. Then, boom, the Industrial Revolution kicks off, and suddenly steam and steel are completely changing society. The old rules about kings and gold, they just couldn't explain what was happening. And right into this chaotic, revolutionary moment steps our first major figure, a Scottish philosopher you've probably heard of, Adam Smith. He was the first person to offer a really complete answer to that big question for this brand new modern age. Now, what's so fascinating is that Smith's world-changing theory didn't start with some super complex, abstract equation. Nope, it started with a simple yet incredibly powerful observation he made just by looking inside a factory. He famously looked at a pin factory, and he noticed that one worker, doing all the steps by himself, could maybe make a handful of pins a day. But what if you break the job down? One person draws the wire, the next one cuts it, another sharpens the point, and so on. Well, suddenly, 10 workers could crank out an absolutely mind-blowing 48,000 pins a day. This specialization, the division of labor, was a productivity miracle. Okay, so this was the how. This is how you create wealth. Specialization is basically a machine for making a society prosperous. But that led Smith to the really crucial question. What's the fuel for this machine? What makes all these different people doing their own little jobs work together? And his answer was a total game changer at the time. It's not kindness. It's not some grand plan from a king. It's much simpler. It's self-interest. As he famously put it, you don't get your dinner because the butcher and the baker are nice guys. You get it because they want to make a living for themselves. And in that simple everyday transaction, multiplied by millions, Smith saw the real engine of a thriving society. Smith gave this incredible force a name, the invisible hand. The idea is that when millions of us are out there just trying to do what's best for ourselves in a competitive market, we are unintentionally led, almost like by an invisible hand, to create the best outcome for everyone. It's pretty amazing, right? Competition keeps prices down and quality up, and it all happens without anyone being in charge. So if the invisible hand works so well on its own, the policy takeaway was pretty radical and clear, laissez-faire. It's a French term that basically means let it be. The government's best role isn't to be a player in the game, but more like a referee, enforcing the rules, protecting property, but otherwise letting people get on with it. It's a really beautiful, super optimistic vision of the world, isn't it? Endless progress, endless prosperity. But what if it's wrong? What if there's a giant, unmovable roadblock standing in the way of all this growth? And that brings us to our second great thinker, Thomas Malthus. You know, if Adam Smith was the great optimist of this classical school, then Malthus was, without a doubt, its great pessimist. He looked at Smith's bright future and saw a very dark cloud gathering on the horizon. Malthus's argument was just brutally simple. He framed it as a great race. He said, look, population, if you don't check it, grows geometrically. It doubles, then it doubles again. 1, 2, 4, 8. But our ability to grow food? At best, it just plods along arithmetically. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see the problem here, right? That gap is destined to become a chasm. And for Malthus, this wasn't some theory. This was a mathematical certainty. It was a law of nature. Humanity was basically running a race against itself that it was hardwired to lose. So for him, poverty and struggle weren't just bad luck. They were pretty much our inescapable destiny. So how does the universe fix this scary imbalance? Well, Malthus laid out what he called checks. You've got preventative checks, things that lower the birth rate. But if those don't work, Nature has its own brutal, positive checks to raise the death rate. Things like famine, disease, war. Yeah. It's this incredibly grim vision that earned economics its famous nickname, the dismal science. All right, so we have Smith's optimistic vision of markets and Malthus's very pessimistic view of our natural limits. Our third key thinker, David Ricardo, is the guy who took ideas from both of them and built a more rigorous, more abstract, and honestly more powerful economic system. Ricardo was kind of a rock star. He was this brilliant stock market wizard who made an absolute fortune and then decided to turn his brainpower to economics. And while Smith was all about how do we make the economic pie bigger, Ricardo got obsessed with a different question. How does that pie get sliced up between the landlords, the workers, and the capitalists? Ricardo's real genius was in creating these abstract but powerful laws to explain how the economy worked. His most famous is probably the law of comparative advantage, this groundbreaking, kind of brain-bending idea that even if one country is better at making everything than another, they both still win by trading. It's this kind of abstract thinking that really pushed economics to the next level. So after all that, what's the big takeaway? What's the lasting impact of these three intellectual giants? How do Smith's optimism, Malthus's pessimism, and Ricardo's rigor still shape our world today? Well, their ideas are now just the bedrock of economics. The whole idea that the market coordinates everything on its own, that's pure Smith. Those laws of diminishing returns and comparative advantage, that's Ricardo and Malthus. The focus on capital and growth, I mean, these aren't just historical footnotes. This is stuff taught in every single introductory economics class on the planet. But maybe their most important legacy isn't an answer, but a question. It's the central conflict they uncovered, this epic clash between the optimistic view of what humans can achieve and the pessimistic view of our natural limits. It's a debate we are still having right now, more than 200 years later. And this slide really nails it. Anytime you hear people talking about technological breakthroughs and unlocking human potential, you're hearing an echo of Adam Smith. But every time you hear warnings about running out of resources or facing environmental collapse, that is the modern voice of Malthus. It's the same fundamental argument, just playing out on a global stage. So, here's the bottom line. The questions these thinkers were the first to ask are still the most important questions we face today. Is our future going to be one of Smithian growth powered by technology and human ingenuity? Or are we finally about to crash into those hard Malthusian limits of our planet? Which of these 200-year-old stories is going to be ours?